Hi everybody, it's Miss Julie and I'm sitting in my backyard and I think you know who this is. Oreo is visiting our house right now while we can't be at school, but hopefully soon we'll all be there together and he will get to go home to his own cage in the fireplace. I'm going to read you a story today that is one of my really favorites, and it's an Easter story which is coming up really soon, and it's called The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes. And before I start reading it, what I want to tell you about it is that the person that wrote it 80 years ago, which means that the book is older than your grandmas and grandpas. It's been around a really, really long time. So I hope you enjoy the story. I'm not going to keep Oreo on my lap while I read. We're going to let him get comfortable in his cage and chew on a little grass. So we'll start the story now. The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes. We hear of the Easter Bunny who comes each Easter day before sunrise to bring eggs for boys and girls, so we think there is only one, but this is not so. There are really 5 Easter bunnies, and they must be the 5 kindest and swiftest and wisest bunnies in the whole wide world, because between sunset on Easter Eve and Easter morning, they do more work than most rabbits do in a whole year. When one of the Easter bunnies grows old and can no longer run fast, the old, wise, and kind grandfather bunny, who lives at the Palace of Easter Eggs, calls the bunnies together from the whole world to select the very best one to take his place. Often a mother bunny says to his child, "If you learn to be wise and kind and swift, someday you may grow up to be one of the Easter bunnies." And all of the babies try their very best so they could grow up and go to work for Grandfather Bunny at the Palace of Easter Eggs. One day, a little country girl bunny with a brown skin and a little cotton ball of a tail said, "Someday I shall grow up to be an Easter bunny. Wait and see." Then all of the big white bunnies who live in fine houses and the jackrabbits with long legs who can run so fast laughed at the little cottontail, and they told her to go back to the country and eat a carrot. But she said, "Just wait and see." The little girl Cottontail grew up to be a young lady Cottontail, and by she had a husband, and then one day, much to her surprise, there were 21 cotton babies to take care of. When the big white rabbits and the jacks with long legs laughed, and they said, "What did we tell you? You went and had all those babies, now you have to take care of them, and leave Easter eggs to great big men bunnies like us." They went away liking themselves very much. Cottontail stopped thinking about hopping over the world with lovely eggs for little boys and girls, and she took care of her babies. And one day, when her children stopped being babies and were little girl and boy bunnies, she called them to her and said, "Now we're going to have some fun." Then to 2 of them she gave little brooms and showed them how to sweep the cottage. 2 she taught how to make the beds. 2 more went to the kitchen, and in no time at all they found out how to cook a good dinner. And with these 2 little dishwashers, they made the glasses shine like crystal. 2 had little wash tubs full of soap suds, and they washed all the linen. 2 did the sewing and mending. 2 had sweet voices, and they were taught to sing, and 2 more to dance, and these amused the others while they worked so hard. 2 others were digging in the garden, and to 2 she gave paints and crayons so they could make pretty pictures for the walls. And when Mother Cottontail had given out all of the tasks, she looked around and there was only one little boy bunny left, and he was sad and lonely. So Mother Cottontail said to him, "You are the most polite of all my children, and I will make you the keeper of my chair. And whenever I come to dinner, you shall seat me politely at the table." Then one day, when the little rabbits were half grown up, she heard talk in the woods, and she asked what they were talking about, and they said, "Haven't you heard? One of the 5 Easter bunnies has grown too slow, and we are all going to the Palace of Easter Eggs to see the old grandfather pick out a new one to take his place." So she called the little Cottontails, and they all set off to the palace to see the fun. But their mother was sad because she thought that now she was nothing but just a mother bunny and could only look on, and that the big white jackrabbits would be chosen. When they came to the Palace of Easter Eggs, there were bunnies everywhere on the great lawn, and the ones that hoped to be the Easter bunny stood together, and all the others looked at them and clapped their paws. And then the big front door opened, and the old, wise, kind grandfather came hopping out slowly, and he told them, "Show me what you can do." The big, longest-legged bunnies jumped and ran and showed him their pretty white fur, and they were all quite fast and very clever. But still he did not pick one, and he said to them, "You are pretty and you are fast, but you have not shown me that you are either kind or wise." Then his kind old eyes looked everywhere, and at last they rested on little Mother Cottontail. She stood with her children around her, and he called her to come up to the palace steps. So she took her 21 children and went up and stood next to him. And when he spoke, his voice was so kind she was not frightened at all. And he said, "What a large family you have, my dear. I suppose they take all of your time." But she said, "When they were babies that was so, but now they are all so well trained, they do most of the work for me." "Oh," he said, smiling, "you must be very wise to train so many children so well. But tell me, do they always look so happy?" "Indeed," she said, "we never have a cross word in our little country cottage, and if I do say so myself, they carry their ears high better than most bunnies." Then he said, "You must be very kind indeed to have such a happy home. It's too bad you have no time to run and grow swift, as I might then have made you my 5th Easter bunny." At that, Mother Cottontail started to laugh. Then she whispered to her little bunnies, and every rabbit on the lawn looked to see what would happen next. The old grandfather leaned forward to watch also. Suddenly, all of her 21 children raced away, and Cottontail dashed after them, and in no time at all, she had them all back again in front of the palace. Then the old, kind, wise grandfather bunny said, "I see you are all so swift. It is too bad you cannot go carry my eggs, because you'll have to stay at home and take care of your children." Mother Cottontail nodded her head, stepped in front of her children, and said, "They take better care of the house than I." She called them up 2 by 2, and as she put her hands on the heads of each pair, she said, "These are my sweepers. They keep the cottage as clean as your hand. These make the beds without a wrinkle. These cook my dinner. These wash the dishes. These tend the garden. These wash and dry all the clothes. These do the mending. These sing. And these dance and keep us merry while we work. These are learning to paint pretty pictures for our walls. And this littlest one always pulls my chair out for me when I sit to the table. So you see, I can leave them to take care of the house until I come home." Then the old, kind, wise grandfather said, "You have proved yourself to be wise, kind, swift, and clever. Come to the palace tomorrow afternoon, for that Easter Eve you shall be my 5th Easter bunny." The next evening, Cottontail knocked on the big front door and was admitted to the palace. There she stood in her funny country clothes, but none of the others laughed at her, for they were wise and kind, and they knew better. They showed her all over the palace from room to room, all piled high with eggs of gold and silver, and eggs that glittered like snow, chocolate eggs, marshmallow eggs, eggs for rich children and eggs for poor children, for children who were sick and for children who were well, all over the world. Then as soon as it was dark enough for the children to be asleep, the old wise kind grandfather gave the word, and the bunnies set off to work as fast as they could. First one and then another would take a large egg or a basket, and in a single hop would be out of the palace and away. Then in a moment back again, and they whisked away over and over. Slowly the night wore away, and the bunnies began to look tired as they kept returning for more and more eggs. And in the palace, the glittery piles grew smaller and smaller. Poor little Cottontail was very tired, for this was the first time she had ever gone so far or fast in her life, and she was beginning to hope that she could soon take the little basket that was set aside for her own children and go hopping home, when old wise kind grandfather called to her. When she went close, she saw he was holding in his hand the loveliest egg she had ever seen. It glittered like a diamond. "Peek through and see what you shall see," he said. So she peeked through the little hole in the end. and saw a beautiful scene with a sleigh, a lake, and people skating on the ice. And he said, "Because you have such a loving heart, I'm going to give you the best but the hardest trip of all. Far over 2 rivers, 3 mountains, there's a great mountain peak, and in a cottage on that peak is a little boy who has been very ill for a year, who has been so brave he has never cried or complained. The mountain is so high, and there is ice on the top. It will be hard to climb, but if you get there, you will give more happiness than any other Easter bunny." Cottontail picked up the egg very gently, and she went hopping away on her journey. She crossed the first river and then the second. She went over the first mountain and then another, and yet another, until at last she reached the highest mountain of all. She was very tired when at last she got to the bottom of the great peak, and her heart sunk when she saw how high it was and how slippery with ice and snow. But, holding the egg very carefully, she started hopping up. At last she reached the ice and snow, and now she was almost to the top, and she could see the little cottage, all covered with snow, where the little boy was sleeping. Then, a terrible thing happened. Her foot slipped, and down she came. Downward she flew into snowdrifts. Then she left the ice and snow, and rolling and bouncing against the stones, she felt the air getting warmer. Down she went, crashing through a thicket of budding laurel, rolling across a pasture, and finally struck against the trunk of a great apple tree that was just getting ready to bloom. And there she lay, with the egg still safe, but with a great pain in her leg. She tried to rise again, because she saw a lovely pink light in the sky, and she knew that in a few more minutes it would be day, and the little boy would be sad if he had not gotten an egg. But the pain was so bad she fell down. Then she felt something touch her shoulder, and she looked up, and there, right before her, way off there in that distant land, was wise, old, kind Grandfather Bunny. And he smiled at her, and he said, "You are not only wise and kind and swift, but you are also the bravest of all the bunnies. And I shall make you my very own gold shoe Easter bunny." And he reached over, and she saw for the first time he was holding a tiny pair of golden shoes in his hand. And he bent down and put them on her feet. Suddenly, all the pain left her leg, and she stood up and picked up that precious egg. And before she knew what was happening, she felt a sudden motion, and she found herself flying high in the air. Over the pastures she flew, over the stones, until at last, when she landed, she looked back, and she saw that in one jump she had carried herself halfway up the mountain. She jumped once again, and there she was at the cottage door. Quickly she squeezed through a tiny crack that had been left open, just in case the bunny had come. And in the hand of the beautiful sleeping boy, she placed the egg. Then, just as the Easter morning sun rose, she quickly jumped back to the palace, where she found her little basket for her own little bunnies, and went hopping back home to give them a happy Easter. She found the garden tended, and sure enough, just as she said, everything was in order. Floors swept, 2 new pictures for the wall, dishes washed, the clothes were washed and mended and hung, and her 21 children were all sound asleep in their little beds. And the little house of Mother Cottontail can always be told now from the homes of all the other bunnies, because in a special place on the wall, on a very special hook, hangs a pair of very tiny little golden shoes. The end. Well, I hope you liked the story, and I think Oreo did. He was a really good listener during the time we read. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you now, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a happy Easter, and everybody take care and stay safe and have fun. Bye-bye.